He kōna I purangi tēnei nā te reo irirangi o Aotearoa.
Ti he wa mauri ora ki te whaiau ki te ao maramaki au we. Ti he wa mauri ora ko Māpuna tēnei mihi atu nei. Thank you for joining us on the podcast for Māpuna. This week's guest has such an awesome backstory, we could have spent the whole episode talking about that. Our guest is Ella Yvette Henry. Ella, after jazz singer Ella Fitzgerald, and Yvette, after, of course, the gold medal winning athlete, Yvette Williams. But Ella Henry has carved her own place in our society. She is a respected academic, a professor at Auckland University of Technology. She's just delivered her inaugural professorial address, even though she's been a professor for 3 years. She got caught up a tree in the Kuranda rainforest in northern Queensland, found her way on a prawn trawler and on boats in South Africa, made her way to James K Baxter's commune in Jerusalem on the Whanganui River, and also got kicked out of school at Kelston Girls in Tāmaki Makaurau when she was just 15 years of age. Now a respected academic, political commentator, and also the academic chair for the World Indigenous Peoples Conference on Education to be held in November this year. This is the story of Professor Ella Henry, and she is our guest on Māpuna this week. I think you're going to enjoy it. We'll also talk a little bit about politics of the day. As a political commentator, of course, she has a number of views about what's happening in the country now. That's Professor Ella Henry on Māpuna this week. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoy it. Kia whakarongoa ki tātou. E te ahorangi tēnā koe. I know you hated that. So thank you for bearing with.
Thank you. That was beautiful. And it was nice that you brought my mum and dad into court at all because, you know, they're the reason I'm here. But also I have actually only been a professor for 3 years because the reason why it took such a long time to be able to have a professorial address is because many of us who were made professors during the COVID years, things were shut down, it was uncertain, and so for that 4-year period, 2020 to 23, anybody who was made a professor was not even given the option. And so I'm very proud to be the first of the post-COVID era to take up the invitation. My dean, I'm very grateful to Professor Kate Kearns, who made the space for that to happen, who turned up, who gave me a lovely introduction and stayed right to the end and then supplied fabulous food for friends and whānau. It was a really lovely afternoon.
How does someone who was kicked out of Kelston Girls at the age of 15, bummed around for years in the 1970s, ended up in a tree in the Kuranda rainforest of northern Queensland and then got on prawn trawlers, how does someone like that become an ahorangi, a professor at the Auckland University of Technology?
You know, at no point in my life have I ever said this was where I wanted to be. And I guess that's one of the reasons why I was interested in Māori Indigenous entrepreneurship, because the more I studied it, the more I realised that this is actually a story of a lot of us. That we, you know, the foundations of Māori or kaupapa Māori entrepreneurship is that we have curiosity, which our ancestors had for thousands of years. They looked at the horizon and they saw opportunity. And they had the courage to pursue those opportunities. They followed fish. They followed, you know, whales off the horizon, and because they just had the courage. But what we also have is that collective spirit. And so as I was learning about Māori entrepreneurship, I was learning about myself and how I had followed opportunities that gave me choices. And, you know, I know this is a terrible thing to say, but the other day I was sitting at the garage getting some petrol and I looked over and there was a koro sitting outside the garage with a sign saying 70 and homeless. And I'm 70 and I'm 3 decisions away from his life. Do you know what I mean? So when we see opportunity and we have the courage to pursue it, and we have the people around us who believe in us and give us the energy to believe in ourselves, because that's all my PhD taught me, was these successful Māori business entrepreneurs in screen production all had people who believed in them, It doesn't sound like a rocket science, but so many of our kids grow up in homes where nobody believes in them. Shut up and get out the back, Al. And the kinds of people they had believing them. It was a father or a Te Arapakahi. It was Jim Moriarty came into his school, burst into his school, and when he left, he hitchhiked up to Wellington to join the Takirua. For Nicole Hoey, it was her dad who was a crazy eccentric who taught her to be unafraid. Do you know what I mean? So. It doesn't have to be a big thing in your life, but to have people who believe in you. And for me, coming back to New Zealand as a 30-year-old, being a solo mother at that stage, doing the New Start program at the University of Auckland, which I give enormous ups to that program. It only lasted about 10 or 12 years, but the majority of us were mature-aged women, 30 plus, who had failed or been failed by the education system the first time around and who were getting a new start. And so the people I met through that gave me the belief that I was smart. And I had no reason to think that. I mean, I knew I was a survivor. I've always been a survivor. I'm a nuggety little sucker from the north, but,
yes.
But
did you not think you're not smart?
Not book smart. You know what I mean? And it was really interesting. I was talking about this the other day. So my dad left school at 12 because school finished. Right, because they didn't have a horse for him to ride from Ahipara to Kaitaia to the college. So he just went to work in the gum fields at 12. And my mum lasted all the way because she was up in Ngātaki to standard 6, so she stayed till she was 14. So that was all my parents' education, and they devoted so much energy to ensuring that we all got books and that we all loved to read. My mother made me learn to read before I went to school, so I know I wasn't stupid.
Yeah.
But I was also a kind of a bundle of neuroses and crazy, you know what I mean? And that wasn't necessarily the most healthy way to enter secondary school in the 1960s and on the threshold of the 70s. I had stuff that I had to work through.
Yeah.
And so it took a long time. I say that I had a very long adolescence and was very fortunate when I came out of that to be in a space where there was an opportunity to go to university, and I found out I was not only book smart, but that I really liked it, I really...
Why do you think that was? Why did you like it?
Because I knew so little about who I am. I mean, I may have been raised in the pa, where everybody spoke the reo up in Ahipara. That did not mean that we had intellectual discourse about anything. We were just, whānau, just in the pākainga. And then as I stayed, and I was very lucky too because I had lecturers like Ranginui Walker and Pat Hohepa and Hugh Kāwharu and Miri Penfold. I mean, these are icons, right? But they were just my teachers. And so a sort of perfect storm happened that I got to go to university. I got to start learning about the true history of our people. And I mean, I just did a lecture, recently with a group of young Māori law students who had their hui at AUT. And I was talking about kaupapa Māori as a methodology, but really what I was saying was, what they've inherited is a world that I was able to be part of changing. And what they will do as young lawyers will continue that, because even some of the things I was telling them about my own history, which is their grandparents' history, like one of the girls came up and said, Nanny never talks about that, but she probably had the same experiences as you, where your mum and dad are walking down Commerce Street in Kaitaia and a white man is walking in the opposite direction, and without thinking they just get out of the way and tip their hat, So we had, by my parents' generation, inculcated the colonial soul, almost. And then we just started to claw it back in the 70s and 80s, and the kohanga reo movement, and people like you and the media being able to speak the reo, and Brown is beautiful. All of those things happened at a confluence of when I was just starting to study. So I got to not only study and learn about myself, but be part of the change.
Be part of that movement.
Yeah.
I have always perceived you as someone who has had an amazing crotchet of words. and the ability to be able to express yourself in a very intellectual... You may not see it that way, but for many of us, we see you as an intellectual thought leader, actually, in the way in which you express yourself. Was that not always the case? Because it seems very Ella Henry. There's a way that I see people and I go, oh, that's very Ella Henry-like. Do you know what I mean?
No, not really. But here's the thing. One of the things I learned when I was travelling and in countries where I did not speak the local language, but people spoke English, was I got to be very, very good at speaking English so I could get water and food. You know what I mean? You learn to enunciate your vowels.
No, exactly. Because you are not a professionally trained
No,
broadcaster.
I'm not at all. But I came back and I've got this cousin and I was at the airport. They came to pick me up at the airport. It was 1984, and I get off the plane and you know he says, "Oh, cuz, cheer, how are you?" And I went, "Oh, I'm absolutely super. How are you?" And he went, "Oh, wanker." But I've been living in England, you know. I was hanging out with Sloane Rangers and everything was just super. So when I got an actual vocabulary, it kind of fit nicely to the modality. But the reality is we're all Māori are multilingual. Yeah. You know, we've got our whānau kōrero, we've got our street kōrero, we've got our home kōrero, and some of us have a professional voice as well.
Yeah. So that was 1984, 41 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you were 30 at that time. Wow, what a time too, 1984. So that's post-Springbok tour, build up to the 84 election, Rob Muldoon.
I was actually in South Africa during the 1981 rugby tour. But because I did not speak Afrikaans, I didn't know what was on the news and I didn't really care. It wasn't until I got to England and read the newspaper and saw what had been happening in my country that I went, holy cow. Yeah. Because that time in South Africa taught me that racism starts in the head. So 5 million white people had convinced 20 million black people that they were inferior. And they stayed inferior till the day they stopped believing. And Mandela made them stop believing that they were inferior. Yeah. And you know, the Taniwha was awoken. And so, but while I was there, because I got there, and I'd been at sea, I'd been sailing for 3 months. I was really dark. I get quite dark. And I'm with two white guys, and we turn up at the, you know, Durban, Cape Town, Durban Yacht Club. This Yapi comes down, customs guy, and I said, so what am I? You know, what am I? Am I black or white? And he went, Nemesi, you're a visitor, you're an honorary white. So because I knew I could go anywhere, because I had this thing stamped in my passport, nobody ever challenged me. And that, years later, when I was studying about colonisation and racism, I realised the first step of decolonisation is believing that we have Tino Rangatira.
Yeah. When did you first become aware of that and actually believe that for you?
It was cogitating around in my head, but it wasn't...
During that experience?
Yeah, during that experience. I thought, this is weird, you know, like I've got friends at work who are black, but I'm not allowed to hang out with them because I'm an honorary, all that stuff. So I was still kind of forming my views of the world. And then I went to England, of course, and like most Māori, you think you're going to the motherland, and then you see these kind of pudgy little creatures wandering around and think, oh my God, you did what to us? And so I kind of like, it was from the sublime to the ridiculous. So when I came home, and that was kind of gurgling around, and then I went and studied with people like Ranginui, you know, who just cracked my skull open and filled it up with amazing thinking and tools, and underpinning it all, the thing about him and Pat is this great love they had for our country. You know, they saw all of the haki-hakis, but they were filled with all of the hope. And I think that has been a guiding principle for me as I've developed further in terms of my thinking and my scholarship and my research.
How do you feel about this? And I know I'm jumping way ahead, but how do you feel about the current state of player politics in the country, where you were talking about things like kaupapa Māori and decolonisation and things like that? There's a fear about talking those issues because they tend to segregate people out. There are people who, they hear that and they just tune right out. They go, here we go again. Yeah. And given where we were in 1984, particularly after what happened with Springbok Tour and then Muldoon and all that kind of stuff, you know, people feel like we're kind of back in that place again. Yet we're a much more informed society when it comes to these kind of concepts. And yet here's where we are.
I mean, I don't think... Look, I think there's been a segment of New Zealand society that have been at war with Māori for about 180 years, pretty much since the four major wars. It's 1852, you know what I mean? When they got their own government and they got their own power, the New Zealand Parliament was created, and it was very, very Eurocentric, very English. And so I think there's been a segment of New Zealand society that's seen us as a problem for 150, 60, 70 years. And at various points in the past, they've waged war against us. They've massacred us. They've, rode into our villages and burned them down. It's terrible. We have some dark, dark history. And then we had a period from the 70s, as Ranginui called it, of the Māori Renaissance emerging and flowering, so that we had this really lovely evolution of what I would like to think is Kiwitanga, which is people of lots of different races and cultures who understand we live in a place that can appreciate all of them without necessarily trying to discard any of them. And I have great joy, as I'm sure you do when you go out into the world and you meet, Muslims who say kia ora, and Hindis that say I'm tangata tiriti, and Persians that, can do a karaki. Do you know what I mean? There's this beautiful backbone of New Zealand society that I am so happy to be part of and proud to be part of. And then there's this little segment.
Do you see it as a very noisy little segment of New Zealand?
An unfortunately very powerful little segment. If we looked just very, broadly at who the supporters are of organisations like the Atlas Network and, the New Zealand Rape, there's just a number of organisations. But when you see the interconnected directorships of them, you see a number of faces and families who have done very well out of colonisation and who are triggered by our Māori success, and I think are even more triggered when they see other cultures comfortably moving into a world that they have never had to inhabit. So there's a lot of anger and rage, I think, in that segment of the population that write angry things every time they see a woman with a moko kauai or hear children playing in a playground and speaking the reo. And I think that they are motivated in part maybe by hatred, but also by fear. And I'd like to think that they are a minority, and I'm out in the world enough to believe they are. However, a number of them, particularly in the current government, are extraordinarily powerful, politically and economically.
And some of them are us.
And some of them are us. And some
What
of
do
them are
you...
us.
I mean, you've got a pretty good knowledge of one of those people in particular, actually, and a general knowledge of a couple of others as well.
Yeah.
They've got our whakapapa. What do you make of that?
I'm politics. I ran a couple of times in the 90s. First for New Labour in 1990, but then when Matiu and Jim formed Mana Motuhake, I ran for the rest of the elections. Thank God I didn't win anything. God, it would have been awful. My life would be so different.
It would be different, but
be
I thought you'd be a great MP. Just quite. I really do. I think. Well, but you're an advocate now.
Yeah, I like being a teacher. I think I like being a teacher more because what I've seen is, and that's to answer to your question, is I have seen a number of our people go into that machine and either get eaten up and spat out by it and been very broken by that experience, or become so inculcated by the trappings, the bells and whistles of power, that I see them drifting away. And I feel like that may have happened to some of our people that we share whakapapa with who are in the current government and who have great power. And I feel really saddened because I genuinely believe that they are on the wrong side of history. And, history is a good scraper of facts. And we look back now at the 70s and we see how insidious, that period in Muldoon was. We look back at the 80s. We look back at Ruth and the budget of 91. So when you end up on the wrong side of history, it gets remembered for a very long time. Yeah. So I worry not so much about them, but that with us, it's everything we do reflects on our future generations. And so when we diminish the mana of our own whānau hapu iwi with our actions, it has intergenerational ramifications. And I think that's sad.
And I didn't want to get stuck in the politics, and I will pivot away soon. But there also seems to be, and you mentioned before, the segment of New Zealand society that is very quick to express themselves in their hatred for wahine wearing moko kauai. We've got a situation now where there's going to be a by-election in Tāmaki Makaurau. One of the people who's put their hand up has faced a lot of criticism just for having the temerity to wear a moko kauai. Does it worry you when we've got so many young Māori young wahine Māori look at Hana Rawhiti Mapi Clark, who are really keen to be a part of the political system, to want to change the system, to want to help their communities, and yet are subjected to this vile kind of piece of society that is so willing and free to express itself in the way that it does.
I mean, I do think it's really essential that young folk, male or female, who make it into Parliament as a Māori and on Māori platforms have good, strong whānau around them. That's absolutely critical, because that can be a galvanising force. It can strengthen you, but it can also keep you on track. You know, it's a good monitoring system. And I see that those, and I've been friends and whānau to a number of them, and many of them the women, who have fallen foul of some piece of process or some activity and just been wiped off the floor, you know, and it's been devastating, not just for them, but for their whānau. And so I do think that we need, as a people, to remember. Okay, so I'm going to jump on another bandwagon, but it's kind of the same as politics, because I'm not really necessarily 100% fan of democracy as it's currently practiced in most Western democracies, because most Western democracies don't even work for most Western people. They work for the people who run the democracy, you know. But Imora, in my view, our traditional model for selecting leadership and controlling them was about being empowered followers. Right, so good for, you know, like I grew up in a hipara where if you talk kaka on that pai, some queer is going to get up and she's going to rip into you, right? That to me is strong followership, because at the end of it she'll give you a cuddle and you know she loves you, but you do that again and you get your ass kicked again. Do you know what I mean? And that to me,
No, I know intimately what that's like.
Intimately what that is.
Have you been to Waimar lately? Yeah, anyway.
Exactly. But what that makes you is a better speaker, a better leader, and you then know who's in your camp. You know, there's nothing to me sadder than being at some gathering and a koro stands up and does a mihi and then has to look around for a waiata. You know, you're saying, the people are telling you something there, bro. And so I just think our old systems have a place in the contemporary democratic political structure around how we pick people, how we support people, how we follow them, how we be good followers, because good followers don't follow fools. Good followers make great leaders even better. And that's what I want to try and do in my communities, to say, we don't have to, I don't see myself as a leader, but I am a very good follower.
We're speaking to Professor Ella Henry. You're listening to Māpuna on RNZ National. How did you end up in a tree in Queensland?
Well, there was a very handsome gypsy.
Really?
It was. It's So Kuranda is if you're in Cairns, Kuranda is the name of the waterfall, barren waterfall, beautiful waterfall, and it's a massive rise from the flats. And there was a hippie village. It's still there, actually. It's still a tourist attraction. But I met this devastatingly attractive man. It's somewhere in a park, I don't know, eating a mango. Who knows? It was 1974. I can barely remember it. But he said, Come and stay at my place. And I said, okay. And it was a tree. There was a platform to sleep on. Yeah. I mean, we weren't complete savages. And the train went by twice a day and we'd wave at them. I love it. It was 50 years ago. And people ask me, why do I not have a moko kauai? Because a lot of my friends and whānau do. And this is a genuine true story. He convinced me because he believed that there was a butterfly in the Amazon where he'd previously been, that was multicoloured and it was a harbinger of peace, brought peace. So I have a butterfly tattooed on a fairly sensitive part of my body. Right. And I promised myself after that, I will never do this again. And there will be nothing that will ever allow me to do this again. And all these people go, oh, you get over it. I go, I don't care. All I'm filled with is the trauma and the pain of remembering.
What does it say, though? So that you definitely know you were there if you don't remember it.
Exactly.
Aside from the butterfly tattoo, we definitely know that you were there. You started talking about mum and dad at the start of this conversation and what they were doing at the time. But a fascinating place. And I know you mentioned that, we were talking about you weren't book smart and all this kind of thing, but it seems to me that there was something fundamentally within you that gave you a sense of belief in yourself, that everything was going to be okay. No matter what was happening.
I don't know that was true, and I mean, I had a number of years of being in very dark places.
You said that when you're on the boat. You said it was dark.
Well, even before that, I'd spent some years when I went up the river with the rest of the. I was a street kid. I was living on the streets. My parents didn't know how to cope with me, and back then, if you did not behave according to the rules, your parents would bring up social welfare. So they rang up social welfare, who put me in Allendale Girls' Homes which was Borstal basically.
Allendale Road.
Allendale Girls' Home. Yeah. So it was a place where you put, and had a fence. Yeah. It wasn't very high because I climbed over it and ran away, but that's another story. And that's how I ended up sleeping in the cemetery when I met Jim. And he said, "Oh, do you want a kite?" And I went, "Yeah, sure." So I ended up staying at his commune in Boyle Crescent in Parnell, and through him met a bunch of others. And I mean, he's actually written a little poem about a number of us, and mentioned by name that we were the lost little. This
is James K Baxter.
Yeah.
You're talking, Jim. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Carry on.
Sorry,
I just wanted to remind the audience who you're talking about. Carry on.
And he just was, I mean, I know that in retrospect there are a lot of people who had darker memories, but he was always very kind and gentle, and one of the boys living there had a truck, and so a bunch of us were like the Beverly Hillbillies, hopped in the truck and went up the river. And so that little spell up the river, a couple of times I was there, was about how I kind of decluttered my mind. But then you'd come back to town and all the same, things and distractions and stuff that you could do that would anaesthetise the mind, so that you didn't have to deal with whatever trauma you were dealing with. And I mean, everybody I met when I lived on the streets had trauma. We all had trauma for various things. In my case, not because of anything my mother and father had done, but from a whole bunch of stuff. So, you talk to anyone who has substance abuse problems or domestic violence problems or intergenerational mental health problems, you will find a trauma. And until I learned a little bit more about how to cope with mine, and there was therapy involved, and there's a whole bunch of weeping and wailing and gnashing of teeth, which is not a bad thing in the progression of the human psyche. I learned to forgive myself, I learned to forgive the people who'd harmed me, and I learned to be able to control my destiny more. Because when you're in victim mode, you don't have any control over your destiny, so you just...
It's hard to see the light.
There is no light. So when you come out and travel, for me, as I've said in the past, not so much just getting out of New Zealand, because, I mean, Australia was just as bad as New Zealand in the 70s, but the great good fortune of ending up living and working on the Moana has it's saved my life, it's saved my soul, it put me in touch with my tupuna in a way that I never could have done otherwise, because the thing about living on a boat is you have to be one with the ocean just to keep your balance. And when you are one with the ocean and you're sniffing the air and you feel the wind, you become a part of the environment. You become a part of the ocean, and this is who we are. This is, 500 years ago, our tupuna were plying their way around 150 years ago. So we are, I think, at our strongest when we are on the ocean, on the Moana. And I always remember Kawiti, that ohake fes titiro atu ki ngā taumata o te Moana.
Yeah, Hotorua Pākeku's got a really good quote about this. He talks about the need, he can feel when he's spending too long on the land, he needs to get back into a sea mode. When he's too long on the sea, he needs... But he's talking about balance and those kinds of things. And I know with the work that you're doing at the moment in Māori entrepreneurship, it strikes me that there's something about people, Māori entrepreneurs, who have that kind of streak is the wrong phrase, but if I want a better way of putting it, is that they've achieved this balance. Many of them kind of, you talked about harking back to those traditions of, Nukutawhiti and Ruanui and Kupe and all those ones, and that it starts from there. There's also a sense of balance, there's inspiration and invigoration from others, but there's also a sense of balance of these are people who can operate in multi-worlds. Peter Lucas Jones can operate in Māori and Pākehā worlds easily.
I know, and here's the thing, even though because a lot of our stories were recorded by white anthropologists, then a lot of the women were disappeared from these stories. And I give you praise for this, Julian. And when I was up at Waitangi last year, you were one of the few people on the Pai who spent as much time, whakamana ngā wahine as you did with the rest of, because a lot of our men forget that. And as I continually remind my students, we were colonised by imperialism, which was assumptions of white supremacy and the doctrine of discovery. But we were also colonised by Christianity and our Father who art in heaven, not our mother and our father. And we were colonised by capitalism and the idea of individual greed and wealth. And ultimately we were colonised by patriarchy. So when we signed that treaty, women in Britain were chattels. Like they were literally belongings of their fathers until they were given away in marriage and became belongings of their husband. And all their children had their husband's whakapapa. So when we talk about those waka that came here, they were men and women on watch. They were men and women who were kaihoe.
I completely agree.
Yeah.
The kura marotini tradition has been limited down to how te roa. One's like Uncle Pat were like that. Yeah, he always used to talk about, that's not the... Have a look on all those waka, there's always a kura.
Yeah.
In his view, he was saying, well, why are we just talking about the little bits rather than actually we're talking about dual navigators here?
Exactly. Well, it had to be.
Yeah.
I mean, if you've got a bunch of people, I know this. I mean, I sailed across the Indian Ocean on a boat with 3 people. Yeah. So for days you couldn't sleep because the Indian Ocean has some big waves in the middle of it. There's no land, So I mean, at least if you were on a waka with 50 people and half are, all adult male and female and the kids and the babies and the old people being looked after, every single person had to be on point. And they would have their watch, they would have their leadership skills, this one's looking at the clouds, that one's looking for the fish. I mean, it is such a beautiful metaphor for what I call relational or cooperative leadership, which got completely expunged by notions of hierarchy that colonised us. God, king, the aristocracy, and somewhere down the bottom the peasants who own no land. I mean, all of that would have been our tupuna wouldn't have even understood that as a logic. They would have just looked at them and said, oh, funny little white fellas, they've got their dinky ideas. But they got nice boats, what can I say?
Exactly. You're exactly right. I mean, and this is a benefit of hanging out with people like Uncle Pat, right? Is you get this kind of appreciation of things that we often don't talk about. Do you see this as a part of an important function of your role? It's not only about that, but it's also about it strikes me, having just done a bit of research, that actually, if you look at our traditions, rather than just keep it in the New Zealand context, if you have a look Moana Pacifica wide, even in navigation schools, India Tabellini, 25, 26 years old, navigator sailing from Tahiti to Aotearoa. I mean, amazing, So if you have a look at that context, that part I think we forget a lot about.
I don't think it's even that we forget. It's been squeezed out of us. Yeah. Okay, so you think, I mean, I've met people from Rapa Nui, Easter Island. I can understand their kōrero.
Wow.
I mean, they kept the Ks, which I don't know where the Tahitians lost the Ks, but they lost the Ks. But then you go to Mangareva, they've got the Ks. So I can go to Mangareva and I can understand the reo. I can go to Rapa Nui, I can understand the reo. So we must have been in contact, fairly continually. And that suggests, especially when Tupaia came and wherever he came ashore with Cook, the experience was positive, So I am increasingly, because the name of us is Austronesian Diaspora, blah, 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 blah. But actually, I really love the idea of tangata moana or kanaka moana or whatever, because moana is one of the few words that is common across all of our language groups. And so our colony, our land, our country is the ocean.
Do you mind if I ask you? It is a political question. I'm sorry to keep doing this to you, because we always call on you when we need you for our political panels at the Hui, but it's because your breadth of knowledge and ability to be able to talk to these issues is impressive, and that's why we do it, and we call on you a lot to do that. There is a current issue at the moment with academics who the word is attack, actually, that people are using. They're being attacked by political leaders. As an academic, does that concern you? And is this the way It is now.
As a human, it concerns me that anyone can get into any kind of political, powerful position in a democracy, the foundations of democracy, counterproductive to the way that some people who are getting into power are misusing and abusing that power to perpetuate negative stereotypes about people that they have negative views of, to elicit hatred, to encourage violence. I mean, I'm not just saying this is happening here. This seems to be happening in a number of countries around the world. Yeah. And one of the things that has become more clear to me is in those settler countries. So I call Australia, New Zealand, Canada, the US, but also India. It was colonised by the British for hundreds of years. And so in these settler colonies that we've all ended up being in, the challenge for us is to really unpick the decolonisation of our minds. And we have been pitted against each other. So if you've been colonised by the French or the Spanish or the Dutch, you're supposed to somehow not have that same feeling of empathy. And so we've now got a clique in power in a number of countries around the world who see Indigenous peoples as a problem. And the reason I believe is because we have a moral high ground. If you look at every Indigenous advocacy, activist people in the world, we're all saying the same thing. Our mother needs help. We all see the earth as our mother, and she's in crisis. So we are the moral high ground against mining. We are the moral high ground against exploitation of the oceans. So get rid of us and you get rid of that moral impediment. And I think that this is happening in a number of countries, from the Amazon rainforest to the Arctic Circle to Oceania. This is not just what's happening to us. And as long as we know that, then we have to work collaboratively across Indigenous peoples, which is why I'm excited that AUT is hosting WIPSI in November. We've got 1,000 people. Indigenous folks from around the world coming here, and I've had a chance to read a lot of the abstracts. They're from literally the Arctic Circle to the Peruvian rainforests, and we are going to have an opportunity as Māori not only to host them, but also to generate kōrero and dialogue around how we all move forward and protect each other, how we work more collaboratively, how we build networks that sustain us in the global political world that is trying to destroy or undermine us. So, these are really important gatherings when we get that chance.
How substantive will you think the output or the outcomes of that conference, how substantive will they be? Because it feels to me that we require action pretty quickly. Can that happen quickly after something like WIPSI, World Indigenous Peoples Conference on Education?
So one of the things I've been studying in recent years with lovely colleagues like Jason Mika and, just an amazing team of scholars, Tanya Wolfgram, is we've been looking at what happens when Indigenous people get together. And we've come up with an analysis of what we call the capitals, because, when we get together, we network, social capital. We also enhance our identity, so cultural capital. But the other thing that's really important that I'm increasingly aware is vital for our struggle moving forward is spiritual capital. So we call that wairua here. We know when we get together, the wairua flows. But to get all of us understanding that actually the gathering is important, and we might come up with some statements like the Coolangatta Statement and, reinforce the Mātātua Declaration. But the real value of us being together is that we will enhance our spiritual capital. Everybody who participates in this gathering, I believe, will go away feeling heartened and strengthened for the next stage of the attack upon our identity, our culture and our values.
Do you think that attack is going to continue, perhaps even get worse over the next wee while, given the state of the world that we're in at the moment, given the way that the powerful political leaders are acting and the way that they're acting at the moment?
I mean, I'm a big fan of circular economy and sustainable economics, and I listen to a lot of the great economists in this country who are all just shaking their heads because the decisions that are being made here and in a number of other democracies around the world are unsustainable. I mean, we are literally, as a species, on a precipice of entire global collapse. And it feels like there's a clique of the most powerful and wealthy people in the world who are in complete denial. They're building underground bunkers in this country or in somewhere else in the world where they think they can go away and hide from the inevitability of the outcome of their greed and rapacious destruction of the planet. So I can't stop that, and I don't think many of us can individually, but what we can do is try and be as strong, keep our waitua as strong as we can, keep our community, our whānau hapu, iwi hapuri, as strong, as empowered as we can, and do it at a personal level. Because only a certain number can operate at that global level, and that's why we need to support our politicians across multiple parties who are at the coalface of trying to make those changes, regardless of what our political affiliation is. How do we support them at the global level? How do we support our business leaders that are doing, and our tribal leaders that are trying to do amazing stuff, which they are? There's that, and then at the personal level, because everything, the personal is political. At the personal level, how do we keep our families safe? How do we restore growing gardens and even in urban communities and holding on to those old skills that kept our ancestors alive? Bring them back into play at a personal level, but also operate at a political level.
I love sitting down talking to you. When I said earlier that I mentioned the Ella Henry way of, and you said, I don't know about that. What I mean is that there's an ease with which you're able to just dissect issues and break them down and then talk about them and the relevance of them to what the kind of contemporary society and particularly as Indigenous communities, what is affecting us and how we do this and how can we collaborate and work together better and all that kind of thing. And I think that's truly a gift. But the reason why I talked about ahipara and parents and things is I wonder where that gift comes from throughout the dark years. And maybe it's something you might not be able to answer. But
I do have such fond memories of... I was born the youngest in my family, so I have no grandparents. They'd all died in the 40s, and I was born in the 50s. But I had a bunch of rambunctious aunties who were all teeny tiny little black women with, very teeny and very tiny and very black and very scary, but also just balls of love. And I guess I'm infused with them. Oh, yeah. I am a product of them as much as I am of anything else. And so I think maybe that had an influence, My mother had a lot of sisters and they were all just glorious women to laugh with and be taught how to play 500 and be slapped around the ear because you didn't cheat well enough when they wanted to win a hand. All of that good fun stuff. But also in there you saw these examples of, and when I learned the history of how horrific what they'd been through. Some of them were old enough to have survived the wars of the invasions of the 1860s and 1880s with their parents at least. And so I hope they infused me with just a scrap of the grace that I remember them having.
Professor Ella Henry Tenawa, thank you. Thank you, as always, for your time, which you always give generously. And we appreciate it, and we certainly appreciate it here as a part of Māpuna and Miana Kia ora.
Kia ora.
That was Professor Ella Henry. Thank you for your time. Our thanks to our producer, Tama o te moana muru. There you go, Ella. Tama o te moana. And Dan as well, who pressed all the buttons and made sure we were technically adept, particularly when the microphone was falling over earlier. Thanks, bro. E mihi ana kia koutou katoa e ngai iwi e ki ana te kōrero ko te toka i a ki hā he toka whitianga rā ko te toka i Māpuna ko tāua ki te ai ki te ripukau. Ti he wa mauri ora, kia tātou katoa.